My father was the kind of man people called a pillar of the community. He was a senior partner at his firm, a deacon at the church, and the man who gave the toast at every wedding. He had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room, until he didn't need you anymore. I noticed the shifts when I was 20. It started with late nights at the office that smelled of expensive bourbon and unfamiliar perfume. Then came the gaslighting. If my mother, Elena, asked why he was distant, he'd sigh with a practiced weariness. "Elena, your insecurity is becoming a burden. I'm exhausted providing for this family, and I come home to an interrogation." He made her feel small for noticing the truth. He told our relatives she was going through a difficult mental phase, preemptively poisoning the well so that when the truth finally broke, he was the martyr and she was the unstable wife he had tried so hard to protect. The break happened on a Tuesday. He didn't come home. Instead, he sent a group text to me and my sister. "I've found a path to true happiness. I hope you can respect my journey." He had moved in with a 26-year-old dental assistant named Tiffany. Within 6 months, they had a miracle baby. At the divorce proceedings, he acted as if my mother were a stranger he was doing a favor for. He leveraged every legal loophole to minimize alimony, telling the mediator, "I have a new family to support now. Elena is an able-bodied woman, she'll figure it out." He didn't just leave, he tried to erase us. He'd post photos of his new life, with captions like, "Finally, a home filled with peace and respect." When I tried to confront him about the $50,000 he'd drained from my sister's college fund to buy Tiffany a Range Rover, he looked at me with a blank, pitying smile. "You're being very dramatic, like your mother," he said. "I'm building a legacy. You're welcome to be part of it, but only if you bring a better attitude." That's when I understood no one was coming to save us. Not the church, not the family friends who still invited him to golf, and certainly not the man who helped raise me. I stopped explaining because I finally understood who was listening. For the next 3 years, I became a ghost in his life. I stopped arguing. I even started liking his Facebook posts. I played the role of the dutiful, albeit distant, son. I watched from the sidelines as the peace he claimed to have found began to rot. Tiffany wasn't the adoring muse he'd envisioned. She was young, bored, and viewed my father as a walking ATM. Because he had alienated his old friends to prove how young he was, he had no one left to tell him he was being used. I kept a folder. Not of his sins, those were public, but of his vulnerabilities. I watched his firm's public filings. I saw him take out a second mortgage on the house he bought with Tiffany. I noticed when he started selling his vintage watch collection on private forums. Meanwhile, I focused on my mother. She had been a shell of herself, but then she met Marco. Marco was an Italian architect who had moved to the city for a project. He didn't just love her, he cherished her. He looked at her like she was the sun. For the first time in 25 years, my mother's laugh didn't sound like an apology. My father would see photos of them, Marco taking her to Lake Como, Marco cooking for our family, and he would send me snide texts. "Hope she enjoys the fling while it lasts." Men like that don't stay with women her age. I never defended her. I just replied, "She seems happy, Dad. How is the baby?" I knew the baby was a nightmare. I knew Tiffany was spending his diminishing returns on influencer-style vacations he couldn't afford. I knew he was exhausted, working 60-hour weeks at 62 years old just to keep up with a lifestyle that didn't even like him. The cracks were becoming chasms. At a dinner I attended at his new house, I saw Tiffany roll her eyes when he spoke. When he tried to discipline the toddler, Tiffany snapped, "Don't yell at him, David. Go back to your office and make some money." He sat there, staring at his plate, a shell of the man who used to command every room he entered. He was realizing that he hadn't traded up. He had traded his soul for a prison sentence with a woman who had no respect for his history. The night of the gala, my father arrived with Tiffany on his arm. She looked stunning and completely disinterested, checking her phone while he tried to shake hands with board members who were suddenly very busy looking at their programs. The Lifetime Achievement Award wasn't canceled. That would have been too loud. Instead, the narrative simply shifted. A week prior, I had quietly shared the documentation of his financial restructuring, the drained college funds, the commingled accounts, with the firm's ethics committee. I didn't frame it as a grievance. I framed it as a discrepancy I found while settling my own taxes. When he walked up to the podium, the applause was polite, thin, and brief. The keynote speaker, a man who had known my mother for decades, didn't talk about my father's devotion to family. He talked about the importance of integrity when no one is watching. During the dinner, my mother walked in. She wasn't a guest. Marco was the guest of honor for his work on the new museum. She wore a deep emerald dress, her arm linked with Marco's. She looked radiant, youthful, and entirely indifferent to my father's existence. My father spent the entire night trying to catch her eye. He wanted to see a flicker of hurt, a spark of the old jealousy he used to feed on. He got nothing. When they finally crossed paths near the bar, my father puffed out his chest. "You look well, Elena," he said, his voice straining for its old authority. She smiled at him, the kind of smile you give a distant acquaintance whose name you've nearly forgotten. "Thank you, David. I've never been better." She didn't ask about his wife. She didn't ask about the baby. She turned back to Marco, who kissed her hand and led her toward the dance floor. The final blow didn't come from my mother, though. It came from Tiffany. As the night wore on and the prestigious crowd ignored them, Tiffany's frustration boiled over. "This is it," she hissed, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I spent 4 hours getting ready for a room full of people who think you're a joke. You said this award would open doors, David. All I see is a room full of people waiting for you to retire." He shrank. He literally seemed to get smaller in his tuxedo. He lost his partnership at the firm a month later, a voluntary transition following the audit results. He currently lives in a condo half the size of his old house. Tiffany left him when the Range Rover was repossessed, taking the child and moving back in with her parents. I saw him last week. He tried to complain about how cruel life had been to him, how Marco had stolen his place. I didn't argue. I didn't point out that he had walked away from that place willingly. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Dad," I said, checking my watch. "I have to go. Marco and Mom are hosting Sunday dinner, and I promised to bring the wine." I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. I stopped checking his name in the news. That was how I knew it worked.